You've said that we have not historically had an environmental movement in this country. And can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I get in trouble for saying that. I said it at Pioneers a number of years ago. And the same speech where I mentioned, I quoted you and got some feedback for that too.
Speaking of manure.
Yeah. From our vantage point, there's never been an environmental movement in this country because movements are about taking things that were previously treated as property and actually transforming those things that were previously treated as property into being rights-bearing entities. So that's a big mouthful. What does it mean? Well, the abolitionists, African Americans were property under the law in the 1850s. There was no such thing as murder of a slave. It was a property damage crime. So you paid the slave owner with property damages because the slave was property and you damaged the property. In the United States, up until 1860s, 1870s, rape was not a crime in the United States. It was a property damage crime. You paid the husband damages. And so under our system of law, we treat certain things as property, certain things as persons. And under our system of law, we've never had an environmental movement because we've never talked about the rights of ecosystems or the rights of nature, and what that would look like. Nature is property under our system of law. And we've tried to build an environmental movement based on this concept that if you have a 10-acre piece of property, that your deed to that 10-acre piece of property carries with it the legal right to destroy the ecosystems on that piece of property. It's part of the bundle of rights that you have, which comes with property ownership in the Western world.
Which, to take it back to rape, is also historically, if one owns a wife,
yes,
then one would have rights to sexual access.
Yes, and for 10,000 years that's been the law, at least dealing with nature and ecosystems. And what's fascinating to us is in 2001, small borough of Tamaqua, in a small little place in northeastern Pennsylvania, not particularly progressive, had a dredge coming in from the Delaware River that was PCB laden that the companies wanted to dump into old strip mine or old deep mine holes, boreholes within the community. And the community said, well, we don't want that, so we got involved with them doing that. But they also said, well, where it's going to get dumped, nobody really owns property near it. Because right now, under environmental law, the only way you get into court is if you have some kind of property interest that's been interfered with so that you have standing to actually go to court in the first place. And they said, well, this doesn't seem right because there are streams there that we fish out of when they go downstream, and we actually use the natural environment, the ecosystems that are in that area where the dredge is going to be dumped. And we said, well, what do you want us to do about it? And they said, well, we want to find a different way to protect the environment. And it was there that the rights-based stuff started. They actually were the first one in the United States to pass a binding local law declaring that nature was not property in their community, but had the right to exist and flourish. So streams and waterways had the right to exist and flourish, and people within the community could stand in the shoes of the river to actually enforce the rights of the river. That's the kind of change that they were talking about. And that was the first place it's happened. And then the folks in Ecuador, who have been used as a cheap hotel for a long time by multinational corporations for drilling and all kinds of other things, heard about what was happening in the United States and actually brought us down to Ecuador to work with the constitutional drafting committee that was put together of these 300-some people who were in committees drafting a new constitution for the country of Ecuador. And they actually began to write in rights of nature into their constitution at the national level. And we assisted with that, and then it was ratified in 2008 overwhelmingly by the people in the country of Ecuador, making Ecuador the first country to transform from a property-based system of environmental law to a rights-based system of environmental law. And to make the story even more incredible is that several months ago there was the first enforcement action where people brought a lawsuit in the name of the Vilcabamba River in Ecuador against the local government that was building a highway that was impacting the river, and they won.
So I guess two questions really left. One of them is, what do you mean when you use the term collective municipal civil disobedience?
That's the phrase that's come out of our democracy schools, is collective, nonviolent, municipal civil disobedience through lawmaking, which is in essence people seizing their municipal entities to turn them up against the state and federal level, and doing so collectively, because it tends to be our civil disobedience when done individually means that the police come over and arrest us and say thank you very much, and the criminal enforcement system then is used for its full extent to put us away or to punish us. That this means moving and evolving beyond that individual civil disobedience to understanding that our disobedience needs to become collective. And it actually needs to begin to seize those municipal entities to turn it into the blueprint of law that we've wanted so long to see and that we actually need to put into place. And so somebody coined that phrase coming out of one of the democracy schools, this idea of collective civil disobedience through municipal lawmaking, that it's folks coming together collectively to do that. And just like the four kids who sat in the Greensboro Woolworth lunch counter, they did it for two reasons. Number one, because it was wrong. Segregation of lunch counters was wrong, and they felt a moral and ethical need to do it. But second of all, they hoped that other people would follow. And so the next day there were 20, and then the day after that there were 60, and then the day after that there was 300. They didn't know. In fact, one of the kids was interviewed, and he said, well, I brought my toothbrush because I knew we were going to be here a while. Getting arrested and being in prison. And so I think these municipalities are doing the same thing, which is these communities collectively are stepping forward and say the system of law is wrong, number one. We feel a moral need to do something about it. But number two, if we do it, maybe somebody else will do it. And when they do it, maybe somebody else will do it. And eventually maybe there's a critical mass that actually drives upwards. Because again, it's not just the corporations or those small number of individuals in the corporation causing problems. It's a system that enables the corporation to do what it does, to do what they do. And that understanding has to be supplanted by a new system of law that actually brings us into the 21st century.
So this is not my official last question. This is an adjunct. So basically, in many ways, where you would, you fit in many places, but one of the places you would fit into Lier's schema would be this building. You're definitely part of the resistance culture, and then you're part of the building alternatives, building legal alternatives, kind of like when she was talking about in Ireland, when they're building alternative court systems to supplant the British.
Yes.
And so that's one of the places you might categorize your work if you were to choose to do so.
I think so. Our work tends to straddle both. It's about tearing down the old bridge while building a new one, and traffic starts to run across the new one because people are experimenting with these different kinds of things. But there's also more than one way to dismantle infrastructure. And in New Hampshire, for example, there's this big project called Northern Pass, where they're trying to wheel energy down from Quebec Hydro to feed the Boston area. And folks in New Hampshire aren't very happy about it, and they're starting to pass laws. We've drafted them. They're going to be on town meeting warrant next year, which actually go a step beyond by saying we're going to prohibit all unsustainable energy systems from running through this community. So actually taking the frame of the NIMBY kind of thing, which is we don't want the power line, but actually putting the power line into a frame where it begins to define what's sustainable and what's unsustainable, and then using that to apply to all kinds of other things, to say we're going to stop that infrastructure from being built before it comes into the community. So I think there's creative ways to use the law that give birth to a variety of different tactics where people begin to understand, what's actually happening to them. Because I think that's one of the things that has been missing for the past 100 years. The last successful people's movement in this country was the populists at the turn of the century. And they were dismantled pretty quickly. And so this generalized frustration that we're seeing today with the Occupy folks, one of the very valuable contributions they've given us is this 99% 1% thing, talking about a corporate class in essence, which I think is immensely valuable as folks begin to grapple with seizing their own municipalities to make law themselves.
So I guess my last question is are there things that I've not asked you that you wanted to say?
I don't think so. But it's
thank you very much.
Yeah. I'm billing for the full hour, so. We do a lot of conferences, and those conferences that we do, I've come to a point where I think that they're fairly pointless, a lot of them, because people come to them for entertainment. And the work that we do is not, it's entertaining, it's fun, learning about the stuff, and the democracies are fun, but we're actually looking for the people who are actually going to do the shit now. And, 10 years ago, we go into a conference and speak to 1,000 people, and, it'd be applause, and everybody would be happy, and that's great. But there'd be very few people coming forward to say, I want to do that where I live. And now we don't do anything except those events that are calculated to lead to finding those individual people who are actually going to do the work. And I think that's a difference about how we've transformed ourselves from just trying to galvanize public education to actually finding those individual people that for some reason or the other are as crazy as you and I, to actually think that they can do something to disrupt the entire system and to throw everything back like jujitsu against the folks that are doing it to us. And those people are very precious to us. They tend to be self-confident. A lot of them are kids. We had somebody come 3,000 miles to work on the Envision Spokane campaign, who's now a staff member of ours working in Pennsylvania. And so these folks that come out of these community campaigns, actually giving them jobs so that people can earn a living doing this work. And that's one of the big challenges now, is finding out how to construct that system with enough resources to actually give birth to those folks. Yeah.